Brian Pissarro with TBARTA staff. I'm the staff project manager for the PD&E study of the Regional Rapid Transit. What you're going to hear today is an update on the station area analysis. The Regional Transit Feasibility Plan identified 21 station areas. We want to narrow that number down. Scott Pringle and Jack Gonzalez from WSP are here. They're going to talk about the analysis that they've done. That analysis has included both quantitative as well as qualitative data. As Scott will mention, we've gotten some really good feedback from the business community, as well as from city and county land use planning staff, and also from our own Citizens Advisory Committee. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Scott.
Thank you, Brian. Good morning, board. Scott Pringle with WSP. As Brian introduced, I'm going to give you an update where we are with the Regional Rapid Transit Project. This is the schedule you see before you. I do want to tell you today, I'm very happy to announce that we're making great progress on the project. We're actually quickly closing in on completing our first milestone. So this morning, almost afternoon, I'm going to give you a quick progress update on where we are. And then ideally, we'd like to come back at your next board meeting in November, and we will have 5 alternatives that we'll be recommending to the board to carry into the next stage, that second milestone, which is 10% design. And within those alternatives, what will be included is the conversation about stations, which I'm here to talk to you about today, as well as how we connect those stations and move those alternatives into 10% design. So before we get started, I do want to do a quick update on public outreach. Without actually even having a major outreach effort yet, which we are planning for the end of this year, you can see the stats here. We've already almost seen 100 views of the video that we presented to you in August, and a number of website hits, and of course we expect this to increase dramatically as we actually get to the point where we're announcing outreach efforts. So as Mr. Johnson noted, we did have a great meeting with your Citizens Advisory Committee, and I won't repeat a lot of the information that Mr. Johnson did provide, but the benefit of having that conversation is we really were able to hone in on exactly the purpose for this project, really focusing on that all-day modern mobility that is quick, safe, reliable, frequent, and provides regional rapid service. And the reason I bring this up is that as we go through these milestones, as we keep vetting out these different evaluations and the technical information, we're going to constantly reflect back on that purpose and make sure that any recommendations coming forward are in alignment with that purpose and those objectives that the CAC discussed last week. So these are the objectives that Mr. Johnson mentioned. Again, I won't read them verbatim, but we do have them here documented. As you can see, mobility, advanced technologies for both vehicle and fare, health benefits, workforce affordable housing, premium transit services that reduce and avoid congestion, as well as lowering commuter traveling costs, and first mile solutions that encourage economic development. So that's a quick summary. Again, I think Mr. Johnson did a great job of covering those objectives. Purpose being, as we go through each step of the technical evaluation, we'll always, as your team, reflect back on those goals and objectives. So, we get to talk about where we are with the stations. So we actually get into some of the fun stuff. It's our first major step in moving towards the completion of that milestone. As you all remember, during the Regional Transit Feasibility Plan, we had a number of questions came up, both from public outreach and from our different stakeholders. And one of those key questions were, okay, 21 stations, where are these stations? What do these stations look like? And what is the appropriate number of stations to carry forward into the next process? So we took on that first question. How many stations should be included as we move this project forward? And what that really does is, by understanding the number of station areas, it allows us to then begin to really focus on some of the details within each one of those station areas. Now, to be clear, for a point of clarification, we're calling these station areas. So this is an area that's about a mile wide or half-mile radii, where a station can be located anywhere within this bubble, as it were. So we're focusing on those 21 bubbles. And once we understand where those priorities are, then the next steps from a station perspective is we get to start getting into the conversation about actually what types of stations are these? Are these stations that have a platform in the middle of the interstate? Is it something that has access immediately adjacent to the interstate? Or is it something that's maybe 2 or 3 blocks actually into a neighborhood at street level? And we call this next step identifying the station typology. So again, we need to know the number of stations that we're going to look at, and then we can start digging into the typologies of each one of those stations. And I know here today you have Ms. Sabia, Terrence Sabia, is going to talk about TOD best practices, and I think it's a great opportunity, and I'm really happy to see that she's here to talk to you today about TOD, because as we're defining those typologies, which will be coming in the next couple of months, that's an excellent opportunity to take the information that she's going to bring forward to you and really integrate that into what we're doing at the station level. So beyond that, identifying those station areas, getting the number right, allows us to start defining what the types of stations they are and where they're located, but it also really helps us on the other side to figure out, well, how do we actually connect these dots? How do we connect these dots along the corridor? What type of alignment is it? Is it 100% dedicated lanes? Is it some other combination of that as we move forward into 10% design? So we did quite a robust technical evaluation. We did a 3-step process, which I'll walk through with you today. But I do, again, want to reflect on what Brian mentioned to you. We had some amazing input from all your land use staff professionals across the 3-county area. For example, we had directors from the cities and the city planning departments. We had Forward Pinellas, Mr. Blanton was representing Forward Pinellas. Ms. Sornita from Hillsborough Planning Commission, director as well, was highly engaged in these conversations. And because of that, we had some really great dialogue, and I'm going to walk you through that today. We also met with the what we're calling our business working group. So this has wide representation across the 3-county area. It includes a number of chambers, whether it's the city of Tampa or St. Pete or the host of other chambers that are out there. Economic development corporations, the EDCs, as well as regional agencies like the Tampa Bay Partnership are also represented. So all the information that you're seeing here today has actually been presented to those 2 working groups. And again, it was both this combination of what we're seeing on the data side, the technical side, in concert with what we're hearing from your stakeholders. And that's where we're coming forward with this progress update and give you an idea of where we're heading in these number of station areas. So, again, a quick point of reminder or clarification. I know I just had a conversation about this with this board in August, but what we are talking about here with this project, it is unique. It is something that is really at the forefront of how we modernize and provide modern mobility along our interstate infrastructure across the entire United States. And it is very different than what you would see from an arterial BRT, which is something that operates at street level, and its stations are approximately ½ mile to a mile apart. Now, on the opposite end of the spectrum, those express bus services that we have operating here today in Tampa Bay, they have much longer distances between their stations, and they're really focused on moving people during the rush hour and getting people to these destinations. We're actually stuck right in the middle of those 2 bookends. We're actually looking at something that not only is frequent and provides all-day service like an arterial BRT, but it is more commuter-based. So our station spacing, you'll see, is more in the range of 2 to 3 miles between stations, because our purpose is to provide access to jobs, provide that commuter regional service, just like the CAC identified and Mr. Johnson identified. So, step number 1 in our process. We met with our land use working group, again, all those individuals that I mentioned before, and the first thing we did is we defined what are our must-have stations for this project. And it was pretty clear cut. It was the key activity centers across the 41-mile corridor, and the must-haves, I'll read them off to you in order. There are 2 in downtown St. Petersburg, 4th Street near Tropicana. From that, we have this must-have station in Caravon, West Shore, downtown Tampa, the USF area, and State Route 56 in Pasco. So right from the beginning, we said, we're gonna take these off the table, we absolutely are gonna move these stations forward, and so the question is, okay, what do we do with the remaining stations out of the 21 recommended from the Regional Transit Feasibility Plan? In this same step, we also met in conversations with the land use professionals. You know, we had a really great conversation about, okay, well, we know we want to get closer to that 3-mile station spacing. Are there any stations of the 21 that we can go ahead and remove now for a whole host of reasons? Maybe they're not physically viable based on their understanding of plans and efforts that are going on in their individual communities, or, you know, is it just some station, for example, a great example of that is in the Toy Town area, where it may be still another 10, 20 years before you have good connectivity at the local level to make that station work. So we actually were able to remove 9 right off the top. I will list them to you here. We had 3 proposed stations in downtown St. Petersburg. So with having 4th Street and Tropicana Field, the group was very comfortable with moving 8th Street, so focusing on 2 stations in downtown St. Petersburg. I mentioned Toy Town, and that it might be a great opportunity, but it's going to be a long-term opportunity versus something that's available to us now. As we move across the bay to Hillsborough County, Howard Armenia and North Boulevard, there's a lot of great local service that's already being planned and provided in those areas. And we also have to be cognizant of our partnership with the department and what they're doing on the modernization of the interstates. And from an engineering feasibility standpoint, it would be very difficult to provide station access at those two locations. So the group is very comfortable removing those. And then moving forward north of downtown Tampa, similar thing, where we know there's a lot of opportunities for service at the local level. Again, our focus is regional service. A lot of opportunities at the local level at Hillsborough Avenue, a lot of engineering constraints involved, historic resources. So these are the 5 that we took off. So we have the 7 must-haves, 5 that we removed in this first step. And what that left us with is 9 stations. So from that, we went to step number 2. So in that next step, we asked the question, okay, regardless of the location of these stations, what's the right number of stations? Is it 7? Is it 21? What makes sense, not because of its position in the region, but what is the most efficient and what has the greatest performance for this project? And the way we went about discussing that and evaluating that is with these 3 criteria that you see up in front of you. We looked first and foremost at the cost effectiveness of this project. Because at the end of the day, the goal is to seek federal funding to get this project implemented. And if we're not competitive in that criteria, we don't have a project to take to the federal government. So we looked at that first. Second, we looked at the details in the ridership and started evaluating different trends in the ridership data to decide what kind of information or what kind of points that we can glean from that. And thirdly, we looked at cost-benefit ratio of providing those stations in regards to the amount of ridership that you're getting from it. So in this slide is that technical information using those 3 criteria, and I'm just going to quickly summarize those. So when we look at the full 16 stations, which is removing the 5, we first looked at a combination of 7 all the way up to 11. And the reality is that less than 11 stations, we're not necessarily going to be cost effective because we don't have the ridership we need to put a project forward to federal government. However, from 12 stations up to 16, now we're well within that range, that striking distance to have a project that's competitive. Second, what we saw is there were big jumps in the ridership, percentage-wise, when we went from 11 stations to 12 stations, and actually when we went from 14 stations to 15 stations. So that simple fact alone tells us that there are some performance metrics that are really taking place in serving that commuter service. So we started focusing then on 12 station combinations or 15 station combinations. But at the end of the day, at the end of the conversation, the last criteria is we know that every time we add a station, we get ridership, but at what cost? So what is that benefit for adding a station in comparison to the cost? And we started looking at that clear number really popped out at us is that 12 is the right combination. It is cost effective, it is the performance we need to get a federal project built and be competitive for federal projects, for federal funding, and it has the appropriate mix of cost benefit. So what we honed in on is 12 stations. Now this is what we took to those working groups. And we had a great conversation, and there's a lot of consensus across all those working groups. They understood the data very well, and they were very comfortable with looking at a combination of 12 stations along the corridor. And if you remember that conversation that I just introduced you about the station spacing, of our goal to be around 2 to 3 miles in station spacing, the RTFP, we're at about 1.3 miles in station spacing. So getting to a number that was about half of the 21 is appropriate. It meets that station spacing goal. The third step was that now that we had a target of the number of stations that we thought made sense, get into the weeds. Let's go station by station. Let's look at the performance of each one of these stations, and let's look for the 5 that we add on to the 7 must-haves to get us to that number of 12, that number that we are seeing technically performs very well. So we have another series of criteria that we applied to the prioritization of stations. It included everything from looking at land use densities and intensities. We were looking at affordable housing, connections to local transit. We actually even did a market evaluation of all 21 stations, and we looked at some real estate trends in each one of those station areas. We looked at the land value, and especially the land value in relationship to the improvements that are upon that land. Because obviously if you have a position where your land value is becoming higher than the facility that sits on it, it's ripe for redevelopment. So that's a good indication of opportunity for transit-oriented development. So with that, we went with those working groups, and we went station by station. And I won't go through every single station, and you can see the ratings here that we identified for each one of these station areas. But with the group, we had some really great conversations. So when we started talking about 22nd Avenue versus 62nd Avenue in Pinellas County, we saw from a technical standpoint that we were getting very strong ridership at 22nd Avenue. It's very close to downtown St. Petersburg. But we heard from city staff and from county land use staff that they really liked the opportunity of potentially looking at 62nd Street for a whole host of reasons. There's a great connectivity to the local transit service. There's fantastic opportunities for workforce housing and affordable housing, which is definitely something that I know we're all looking at, and I know it's very important to Pinellas County. So with that dialogue, we understood the technical performance, but for the purpose of our stakeholders, they were leaning more towards moving forward with 62nd Avenue. So it was a great conversation. Similarly, when we jump over to Hillsborough County, we had a great conversation about the stations north of downtown Tampa. This is Flora, Nebraska, MLK, and Waters/Bird. When we looked at Waters and the Bird area, there was consensus across the board. Everyone felt very comfortable that this would be an excellent place to have a station. There's great TOD opportunities, great redevelopment opportunities. You're right next to the river. There's a lot of community assets in that area. And from a technical side, we saw a lot of good performance in there. So right from the beginning, everyone was comfortable with Waters and Bird. We had this really interesting dialogue to the technical results that we were seeing for Flora, Nebraska, and MLK. We didn't see the ridership that we were expecting. I'll be honest, I was personally surprised. I expected a lot more ridership out of those two stations. And what the truth is what we're seeing from the data is that those station areas, being so close to downtown Tampa, have such a significant amount of local transit service as it is today, is that commuter regional market isn't there. So we're not picking up those commuter rides, which is the purpose of this project. So it was really great to see that sort of vet out through the technical data. We had a good conversation with the working group about that. But ultimately, what we were left with is the understanding that between Bird or Waters area and downtown Tampa, we needed to have some sort of access for the Seminole and Tampa Heights neighborhoods. So we were asked by the Hillsborough Planning Commission Director to go back and revisit that portion of the corridor, potentially add in a 13th station, which is fine. We were comfortable with adding 13 stations versus the 12 targeted, and look for an opportunity to provide good connection that's really going to pick up that commuter service, that fits the purpose of this particular project. So we're continuing that evaluation now, and we're going to bring that back to you in November. Moving farther north, this is jumping north of downtown or the USF area. We have another great
Scott,
concept.
I think Commissioner Kemp wants to
Yes.
ask a quick question.
Yeah, sorry, I don't know whether it's better to ask now, but since you're on it, back to the, those in Tampa, did you say the planning commission director, Melissa
Yes.
Sornino, asked you to look at those?
Yes.
I think that would be a very, I think it should be at Waters and not at the others. So I'll just add that, but
Understood.
I'll talk to the planning commissioner,
Very
but I
good.
just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thanks.
So moving further north from the USF area, we're looking at Fletcher and Bears. A very different story from what we were seeing at those two more urban stations closer to downtown. We actually saw more ridership than we expected, and the reality is it's the opposite story, right? Here, there isn't quite as much local transit coverage. There is definitely a commuter market to be served, and we saw the ridership estimates show that and prove that in the data that we were looking at. However, when you look at Fowler, Fletcher, and Bears, they're all very close together, so the conversation from the stakeholders was, let's focus on Bears as that point north of downtown USF, and use that as that ability to start collecting people into the system and providing that regional service. And then, of course, when we look north to Pasco, we saw good performance and great opportunities at both 56 and 54. We had great conversations there.
Is there, okay, you see State Road 54 here?
Yeah, so I'm going to come to that, Commissioner. So what you see here is just a reflection of the technical information and those criteria that we applied in that three-step process. But that's only half of the decision, I believe, moving forward. It's really important that your stakeholders and the input we collected from those stakeholders also provide us that direction. And we've incorporated that, just as I discussed with you this morning. And this is the stations that we're moving forward with right now, heading towards that milestone number 1. So starting from top to bottom, just to make sure that everyone's clearly understands, is we're looking at State Route 54, State Route 56, Bears Avenue, USF area, Watersburg, the potential for something in between, but if we have further conversations, Commissioner, we can certainly do that. Downtown Tampa, Hines, West Shore, Carolina, 62nd Street in Pinellas, knowing the 22nd there is a backup opportunity moving forward, and then Tropicana Field and 4th Street and St. Pete, which gives us the 13 as we move forward. So from this point, and what we're going to bring to you next month is working off those 13 stations, or possibly 12. We're going to start looking at how do we tie those stations together? What are our options from an alignment standpoint? Is it 100% dedicated? Is it 90% dedicated? What are the options there? And we're going to bring that to you in November for your direction. And that, again, allows us to then start having the conversation in early spring, late winter, about the types of stations and really vetting out the TOD opportunities, just like Terrence's going to mention to you today, and really begin looking to move these 5 alternatives into 10% design and ultimately make the request to the federal government to enter into the capital investment grant program. So with that summary, I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Scott.
I'm curious if you looked at the new interchange that's coming, it's overpass. It's a little further apart between 56 and 54, and the county actually owns property there. And we have a very large industrial project coming. We own, I think it's 200 acres there. And it's going to be a big work site. So I just wonder if that makes more sense than 54 and 56.
We did have a good conversation about that overpass road. Specifically, the director of Pasco County Transit brought that to our attention. It was something that he was very aware of and very interested in. That is absolutely a possibility. It does add length to the overall corridor, which affects our operating costs and certainly our capital costs if we're trying to put a dedicated lane in there. But these are areas where I think we can continue to remain open as we go through the design process.
Also gets a little closer to Fernando.
Further north.
Understood.
Members, other questions?
I have a couple of questions. You didn't talk about Hines, and I have concerns about Hines in terms of, I just wondered, It was mentioned yesterday that and I know it's been all along, talking about perhaps locating some of these stations in the center of the interstate, which I think is, from all accounts that I've ever read anywhere, it's for one, a very inhospitable place, an extremely expensive place, and is not conducive to transit-oriented development. People have to walk into this. And so I wanted to express that, especially in terms of Hans, that I would think it would be a very poor idea to ever consider locating a station in the center of the interstate as opposed to entering the road and coming back on again at street grade level.
No, great comment, Commissioner. We've been working very closely with the department and working with the TV Next designers to understand exactly what the geometry is. And as I understand it, at this point, we do have the potential to actually come down and get out of the interstate and make a connection that could be either on the north side, where some of those bigger boxes are aging and potential for redevelopment and TOD on the north side of the interstate, or of course on the south side. I drive by it every day. Midtown's coming out of the ground as we speak.
A few other comments. At what point, you originally stated that there would be 9,000 parking spaces associated with this, which, as you know, I've had many concerns about. I, of course, would not like to see any more parking added to downtown Tampa. I don't believe that, I don't see, I'm not sure about the Hines area or the Fletcher, but I certainly would like to see within the city limits of Tampa. I'm very concerned about adding parking or very limited parking. To me, that 80% of people, when they go to transit in an urban area, approach it by walking. And then also concerns in terms of Waters Avenue, because I would not like to see these areas filled with parking garages. And I'm speaking to the city of Tampa. The other places I don't know or pretend to know, but I'd just like to know at what point is that part of what in this process about in terms of the parking garages?
Yeah, it is part of this process, and we're actually going to get into some detail on that. You can expect that in the spring timeframe of next year. We put a placeholder in when we were doing the planning effort for the RTFP. Now that we've got some details and we understand some of these station area potentials, we're going to actually get into a lot more detail. And I'll be honest with you, Commissioner, my personal philosophy to approaching defining these stations is that it is not a one-size-fits-all. We have to go through and look at every station individually, understand the community context in which those stations will exist, and make the right decisions for that community. So if it's at the discretion of this board that there are stations that have zero parking, then that's appropriate for this study.
Finally, I just want to ask, because it's come up here before, this wasn't part of this, but in terms of set aside right-of-way exclusively for bus lanes, and I will say that I was with a group of national experts on these topics a few weeks ago, and I said, do you know any place in the nation where there's a set-aside bus lane on an interstate? And I wondered if they could give me any examples. And no one could, and finally someone said they thought that there was one in the Lincoln Tunnel that has been there for many years and has buses every 5 minutes on it. I'm just saying that it doesn't seem to be a practical, cost-effective option. And so I wanted to bring that up at this time, because I know the pictures are all showing that, and we've had a discussion of that, but I never thought that could actually exist, because I frankly figured that if such a thing was set aside, that there would be a lot of public outcry from an area like this.
So I think that's where I mentioned those alternatives. We're going to carry forward. We are going to study that. We're going to evaluate that, whether it's 100% dedicated or some other combination. Directly to your comment, Commissioner, we are breaking new ground in a lot of ways here. This concept for Tampa is on the cutting edge of how you apply bus rapid transit, especially within an interstate environment. But I will point to the fact that we do have this very unique opportunity present to us. And that's the partnership with the Department of Transportation. They are actively looking at modernizing their interstates and have, at least informal conversations of interest, including these additional benefits to transit as part of their larger project, which would be actually give us the opportunity to potentially leverage federal highway dollars, not just federal transit dollars. So that partnership alone is unique across the country. So I think we're just kind of looking to exercise that opportunity and find the best path forward. And that'll be part of what we're doing during the PD&E. But you're right, we are actually on the cutting edge of how we apply this particular mode in interstate parking.
Any further questions?
Mr. Stark?
Just in doing research on that, I just read that in New York City, they closed 14th Street, very busy street, and it's only open for buses only. And that they're traveling so quickly that people are missing their stops. And it's becoming a great pedestrian corridor as well.
Yeah.
So,
Can I just
interesting concept.
clarify, what
No, it's
I-
not a highway.
Yeah, exactly. And and that makes all the difference. There's plenty of places that are really robust, bus rapid transit at street grade level, where streets have been set aside, and that's where it makes sense. But that is the major point. It's not an interstate.
Well, I think we're a little hamstrung here, so I think this is our best opportunity.
Well, and I'll be honest with you, the truth of the matter is our region is so woefully behind in how we provide premium transit that we have needs across the board.
Right.
And this is a solution that really works well with the assets that we have in place today to serve that purpose, provide that commuter regional service. The arterial BRT is an excellent tool as we're looking at providing circulation at the local level. Rail, I love rail, and I would love to see it be brought to this region, and it's part of this pantheon of tools that we have to actually take what has historically been an auto-dominated region and begin migrating into a more modern transportation system.
Now, one question I had to Commissioner Kemp's point about parking, I think that obviously as AVs come on the scene more and more, parking is going to be diminished, possibly even more than we realize now. And I think you have to, when you do set aside parking, you have to also look at the convertibility of that parking to other uses, as it's supplanted by AV technologies that just have a drop-off at a station and not a need parking. So I assume you're contemplating that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And, we are working close with the department on, specific station areas like the West Shore Intermodal Center, in which we're taking that very much under consideration and providing more space than you would anticipate for the rideshare, microtransit availability, the walk pedestrian as compared to sort of traditional automobile parking.
Members, other questions? Okay, thanks for that, Scott.